the Investing News Network, and here today with me is Doug Casey of Casey Research. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Charlotte.
Great. So we're here at the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. I think many people came here wondering where they should put their money in 2018. What would you say to them?
Well, one observation I'd make is that this is a resource investing conference, and it specializes these hundreds of booths, mining companies, gold, silver, copper, and so forth. But what people are really interested in right now are Bitcoin mining companies. And they're also interested in marijuana growing companies. So here in Vancouver, the way it works is that, like in 2000, remember the internet bubble? There were a lot of busted mining companies that overnight turned into internet companies, which subsequently went bust. And then they, after that, became uranium companies, which went from 6 in the world to about 500, and then they all went bust. So what I want to say is this: if you're looking for a place to invest, it may be a little bit late in the day to invest in blockchain or Bitcoin mining companies and or marijuana companies. They're a little bit too popular right now.
Okay, mining, you mentioned in your panel or talk that we just were at, could be the next bubble. Can you go a little bit on that?
Well, my argument is this. It's that since 2007, governments all over the world, not just the Americans, the Europeans, the Chinese, the Japanese, and all the little governments have created trillions and trillions, scores of trillions of new currency units to bail out their banks and insurance companies and prop up the general structure. And most of those currency units have gone into the stock market and into the bond market, which is in a hyper bubble all over the world, and into real estate. So they're continuing to print up money. They're going to create other bubbles. Now, we've had a Bitcoin bubble, a marijuana bubble very recently. I think the next bubble, and it's very logical, is going to be in gold and silver and other metals. They're the only things in the world that are cheap right now. Everything else is sky high and promoted, but nobody cares about the mining stocks. So I want to be there for that reason, because it's cyclical. And when these little mining stocks run, they don't just double, they go 10 to 1, they go 50 to 1. So I think a smart speculator, as opposed to an investor, that's another subject we could talk about entirely, would put his money into small mining exploration companies.
Any specific companies you would mention or characteristics that you look for?
Well, look, all I can do is talk my book and say what I'm a big shareholder in. One company that I own a lot of and have for some time is a company called Metalla Royalty, which is now the only company on the Vancouver Stock Exchange that pays a dividend. It pays a monthly dividend, and it's about to double its dividend. It's trading at 70 cents. I think it's going a lot higher. Why? Because royalty companies are historically the safest way to invest in mining. They don't have any of the big yellow trucks and none of that. No, they just pay money to buy a royalty stream from somebody who's mining. And since Metalla is very small, it's able to buy small royalties from small companies. So it's a space in the market where nobody else is. So that's a tip. But don't buy the stock because you heard about it on television. You've got to do some research. But there's a number I could draw your attention to, and that's just one of them.
Okay, you did mention a specific advantage people in Vancouver have when they're doing their research. They can go and see the mining companies. What questions should they be asking?
Well, over the years, I've developed what I call the 9 Ps. It's a mnemonic, but there are so many Ps I can't remember them all myself. The first mnemonic is people. You've got to get to know the people, and if it's a suede shoe guy who you wouldn't buy a used car from, don't buy a mining stock from him either. Okay, so, and then the property. You've got to know a little bit about geology and so forth. And then the politics. What country is it in? You've got to know something about that. And The financing, spelled with the PH. How much money do they have, and how much more are they going to have to raise, and how dilutive will that be? And the paper. Who owns all the paper out there? So there's a list I go through, and everybody should go through when they're analyzing these stocks. So you can go on our website, kcresearch.com, and we have the 9 Ps listed there. They're worth studying.
Okay. All right. So the last time we spoke, you talked a little about bubbles, which we touched on just now. Bubble in the stock market, and why that's a problem. I imagine it's difficult to predict when that's going to burst. But what are some signs that people could look at and say, okay, that's approaching now? I should.
Well, the fact is that stocks are, by all measures, price-earnings ratio, price-to-book value ratio, every way you look at the stock market, it's in a bubble. I mean, it's at unreasonable levels. And the reason it's at a bubble is because these central banks are creating trillions and trillions of currency units that are all flowing into the financial markets. And the fact that there are certain sectors of the market that are super double hot because of all this hot money flying around. So generally speaking, with some exceptions, like the mining stocks at the moment, it's not a good time to be in the stock market. I know people aren't going to want to hear that. They're not going to believe it. I know the arguments why the stock market could go higher, and they may be right for the short term, but that's just my opinion.
Where is gold in all of this? We've talked a little bit about mining stocks and things, but where's the gold price going this year, do you think?
Well, gold is the only financial asset that is not simultaneously somebody else's liability. And in times of financial chaos, which we are going to be seeing sooner, not later, people don't want to hold paper. They want to hold something real, and gold is money in its basic form. So there's going to be a bubble in gold, and I hope to capitalize on that. And what comes after gold, I don't know. I mean, for instance, the marijuana stocks. Yeah, they're in a bubble right now. Okay, but I think that bubble can get bigger because I think the U.S. is going to legalize marijuana on a national basis. And that's going to have a big effect. I mean, I wrote a book last time I was on your show, called Drug Lord. I mean, I'm a child from the 60s and the 70s, and if you didn't get into computers, you got into drugs in those days. And I'm not personally a fan of drugs, but I think there's a hysteria against them. So I wrote this novel, Drug Lord, as part of my effort to reform the reputations of unjustly besmirched and politically incorrect occupations. Well, another story, but yeah, I think the marijuana business is going to have legs. Lots of problems because there's hundreds of companies out there and most of them are just junk. But the area, yeah, it's going to get as big as the liquor business.
Okay. Any final trends that you think investors should be aware of for the coming year?
Well, on a longer-term basis, Western civilization itself is in big trouble and is headed downhill. And it's too bad, because Western civilization is the only civilization in the history of the planet that's ever been worth the powder it would take to blow it to hell. Most of them are worth nothing. And it's sinking. I don't know what it's going to be replaced by, but you can forget about things like individualism and personal liberty and all the rest of this type of thing. But that's big picture stuff that doesn't really have an effect on the market here and now.
Okay. All right. And in closing, when is your next book coming? What will it be about?
Well, my third novel will be Assassin. And I think it'll be well timed because a lot of these Antifa people are talking about, let's assassinate Trump. So it's the next occupation our hero, Charles Knight, gets into. And we look at the history of assassinations, the morality of assassinations, and whether there's any point to them. So I think it's going to be the best of the 3 novels so far. So look out for that in August when it's released.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me again. Once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with the Investing News Network, and this is Doug Casey.